Hello again, everyone. So we're still working from page 260, chapter 6.2, and solving trig equations. And when we look at this, notice how we have a squared term here. This is a trinomial, so we can solve this by factoring. And if the trig functions really bother you being in here to factor, you can replace them with x squared plus 2x plus 1 equals 0, and then substitute the trig functions back in at the end of the problem. So we know that if we factor this out, we're going to have an x and an x here, and a 1 and a 1 here. So we have x plus 1 times x plus 1. And if we solve by factoring at this point, we have x plus 1 equals 0, x plus 1 equals 0, or x equals -1 for both sides. Now it's time to put our cosine back in. Because we, at the beginning of the problem, we let cosine of x equal just x. Now we're going to put that back in. So we have cosine of x equals -1, cosine of x equals -1. And thinking about where that occurs on our unit circle, we have this point right here, which is -1, 0. So if we think about our interval, and still between 0 and 2 pi, not including the 2 pi, so our interval is between 0 and 2 pi, inclusive on the 0. We have, this is at pi over here, or 180 degrees. So we have x equals pi radians, and that's going to be the answer to this particular question for that angle. So we're going to try one more. This is number 19. 2 cosine to the 4th power of x equals cosine squared of x. I'm going to bring this over to the other side, get everything on one side of the equation. So we have 2 cosine to the 4th power of x minus cosine squared of x equals 0. And we can factor here again. Notice how there's a cosine in both terms here. We can factor out a GCF. So if we factor out a cosine squared of x, that gives us 2 cosine squared of x minus 1 equals 0. Now that we're factored, we can set both factors equal to 0 using our zero product property. So we have cosine squared x equals 0. If we take the square root of both sides here, we're going to get cosine of x equals 0 for that on the left. And on the right, we have a little bit of isolating to do. So we're going to bring this -1 over to the other side. Divide by 2. We get cosine squared x equals 1/2. Okay, so to undo a square, we take the square root, both sides. When we do that, don't forget the plus and minus. We get cosine of x equals plus or minus. Square root of 1 is 1. Square root of 2 is square root of 2. Now we need to rationalize. We can't leave that radical down there, so we're going to multiply by rad 2 over rad 2. And we get rad 2 over 2 is equal to the cosine of x. So if you think about where that happens on your unit circle, cosine of x is rad 2 over 2 at the pi over 4 over here, and over here, and over here. So we're making our 45-degree angles. So this is 1 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4, 5 pi over 4, and 7 pi over 4. Going back to the left side, where cosine of x equals 0, that happens in two places, here and here. We have 0, 1 and 0, -1. So our angular value here, pi over 2, and 3 pi over 2. So you can see here we have 6 angles, 6 different answers, 6 different angles that make this equation true. And now that's it. Bye, guys.